It's Wednesday. Welcome back to Ask Ashley with Ashley Overhouse, the Resilient Rivers Director of Friends of the River. Hey, Ashley.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me.
And we're here today to just chat real quick about the 30 by 30 initiative for California's government.
Yes. Yeah. What is the 30 by 30 initiative? So I'm
Yeah,
sure everyone's asking.
I'm assuming the answer is not 900. So what is 30 by 30?
Correct. Well, briefly, it's a plan to conserve and protect 30% of California's lands and waters by 2030, hence the 30 by 30 tagline. And it's under the direction and coordination by the California Natural Resources Agency.
So by 2030, that's only 8 years away. How much of our land is conserved already? How far do we have to go? Do we know?
That's a good point. It is only 8 years away. And so while that is scary, it actually is absolutely necessary to hit that deadline. And we actually don't know how much of our land and waters is currently conserved. It all depends on really how our state defines conservation. And that criteria then will inform another parallel effort that CNRA, or the California Natural Resources Agency, is doing to put together a GIS, or a geographic information system, which is going to collect statewide data on biodiversity, climate, and equitable access in a suite of interactive mapping and visualization tools. And basically and you could even participate, you can submit data, it's open to the public, and it's going to be a great inventory to make sure that we prioritize and track actual progress towards that goal of conserving 30% of our lands and waters by 2030.
So step one is figuring out where we even are to begin with, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. And really, one of the biggest things that came out in a recent draft by the state is their first draft definition of what conservation is, to help us get that in the first step of what have we conserved so far. So the formal definition is land and coastal water areas that are durably protected and managed to support functional ecosystems, both intact and restored, and the species that rely on them. So what does that actually mean? The state has broken it down into different areas where they're protected under that definition into rankings. So like 1, 2, and 3, with the highest levels of conservation.
Okay.
So for example, for Friends of the River, we're all very familiar and happy to see that the #1 ranking under conserved lands is wild and scenic rivers.
Wild and scenic, that's our favorite phrase here in environmental nonprofits, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So, right, what is the 30 by 30 initiative meant to do? Like, aside from obviously conserving land is good, what's the idea behind all of this?
Absolutely. So the idea of conservation and the 30 by 30 initiative is really to preserve ecosystems, and it'll help with improving overall statewide resilience to the impacts of climate change. And so really the term that the state is using is prioritizing nature-based solutions. What that means is this umbrella concept that is ecosystem approaches to protect and restore nature to deliver multiple outcomes. So that means protecting public health, increasing equity, and protecting biodiversity, since California is one of 36 biodiversity hotspots around the globe. And examples of what those solutions are could include community greening, which helps with facing extreme heat with vulnerable communities, reducing energy costs, allowing soils to better absorb water, which we really love at Friends of the River. It enhances biodiversity, reduces the impacts of pollution, and sequestering carbon and reducing flood risk. We're huge fans of all of those wonderful solutions that really can only come from, frankly, this 30 by 30 initiative.
So it's quite ambitious. There's a lot of different things involved here.
Definitely.
And aside from our state government taking this on, who else, like what else is behind this? I mean, the Biden administration just announced well, about a year ago, announced that the federal government would be getting behind this, but who else?
That's a good question. So actually, Governor Newsom for California led the way on this. And we should give credit where credit is due. It was the first state to declare that executive order in 2020, which was a big deal. And then Biden followed up within his first 2 weeks in office to declare a similar executive order for the whole United States in January of 2021. And honestly, while we're really grateful for that leadership, we were kind of behind the eight ball a little bit internationally. So the same goals as the 30 by 30 initiative are being pushed by the High Ambition Coalition, which is a group of over 70 different nations across the globe. Unfortunately, it should be noted that the world's largest countries, such as Russia, China, and Brazil, have not signed on to it yet. So, it is a big deal that the United States is taking a leadership and a public stance in favor of this.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, aside from just being large geographically, we're a major polluter as well.
Yes, we are.
Why is this important for rivers specifically?
So it's important for rivers specifically because healthy free-flowing rivers are a critical part of our resilience to the impacts of climate change, something that you and I have talked about quite a bit in other topics and other videos, but it's especially here because this is something that is a landmark policy initiative that can prioritize healthy rivers. So it creates just a big opportunity to frankly further protect and prioritize rivers that have frankly historically been neglected, overused, and overallocated.
Right. So I guess the word initiative isn't used all that often. Like, what can we get out of an initiative? Is there like monetary support for projects? Is there like changes of law or policy here? What are we talking about?
Talking about actually both, that's a good question. We can talk about actual funding, so actual dollars towards implementing shovel-ready projects. Planning dollars to means that it's planning on larger scale for conservation at a larger scale, frankly. And we're also talking about new policy and new law that will help implement this really ambitious initiative. So the actual pathways, draft pathways document outlines 9 areas of actions, which are pretty nice. They got right to the point. They categorize them into 9 areas, but the ones that are most relevant for us here are execute strategic land acquisitions, enhance conservation of existing public lands and coastal waters, expand and accelerate environmental restoration, which we're really excited about, strengthen coordination amongst government agencies and key partners, and then align investments to maximize conservation benefits. And those are just a few of those 9. These will all benefit rivers, frankly, but especially conservation and accelerating restoration. Restoring freshwater aspects of California it's not only critical, but it's also, incredibly important for water supply, flood control, fire protection, water quality, carbon sequestration. So it's really linking the importance of healthy freshwater ecosystems, healthy rivers, and meeting our climate goals and really being resilient to those impacts of climate change, which is really important. Unfortunately, we would like to see a little bit more of that acknowledgement of freshwater ecosystems. We really have only seen in that document and by the state so far emphasis on public lands and coastal waters. So making that connection of those strategic actions and freshwater ecosystems is something that we're looking forward to the state making, improving a little bit on.
You'd think it would be baked in given the fact that public lands includes water, but I guess always better to be more specific.
Absolutely.
So obviously better late than never, but it's also particularly important now, given like what we're hearing now about this massive drought we're in. That giant atmospheric river back in December has not repeated itself.
No, it has not. Unfortunately, while we're sitting here, it's hailing a little outside, but other than that, it's really just been an incredibly scary and dry winter for California. And really, unfortunately, as well, I'm sure most people saw headlines earlier this month with that devastating, especially headline from the NPR about how we are in the worst drought, or experiencing the driest period in the Western United States in the last 1,200 years. And that was according to a new study that was published in the journal Nature Climate Change. And the journal's author, specifically gave a great quote, I thought, in that article, saying that, roughly 1/5 of this current, what they're calling mega drought, can be attributed to human-caused climate change. Climate change has put that yo-yo on an escalator heading down on our water system, right? We're having really incredibly dry years, and we can have really, really wet years. But unfortunately, we can't get tricked by a few wet years into giving up on the progress we're making for overall better water management, because only 1/5, as you said, 1/5 of that mega drought is caused by climate change. So I think that what we can really say is that it's exacerbated the state of our water, especially in California, by poor water management. And the 30 by 30 framework is a positive step to acknowledgement of that connection. Like I said before, in realizing that our future will just have less water. We actually have to change our relationship with water, as the study's author said. We have to realize that, we have to have healthy rivers. What little water we do have, we need to make sure is conserved and really wisely used, and then make sure that what water we do have, as rivers are the veins running through these lands. We won't have healthy lands without healthy rivers.
So you use that word like acknowledgement, that this 30 by 30 is acknowledging the link between water and climate and governmental policy. Like, aside from, obviously you need to admit something to be true before you can do anything about it. Like, are there other ramifications to this, to the government basically like stating that this is a thing?
We hope so. Acknowledgement is the first step towards actual changes in law and policy, such as wild and scenic protections. You can say a river is wild and scenic, but without that actually being in law and classified as that protection, doesn't have any sort of additional ramifications. And the 30 by 30 framework is being referenced in new law that's currently going through the legislative process, but we need to have it as a foundational document for new water management policy. So we can really start prioritizing healthy rivers, and so that makes positive change in both state and hopefully ideally federal law as well.
So who actually does this? Again, it's an initiative, not like a law that we're hearing about going to the legislature. Like, what is actually happening here?
That's a really good question. So one of the things we've talked about in other videos too is how many different plans there are and different aspects of the California state government that work on either climate change and or water. But there's not one overarching state policy that's connecting the two. And I mean, there always can be room for improvement, but one of the things that's really great about the 30 by 30 initiative is that the California Natural Resources Agency was put in charge of coordinating all the efforts to implement this one framework. So everything has to be coordinated through the 30 by 30 lens, so to speak, and through CNRA, which is really great. And honestly, key objectives of that are that they define conservation. They have key objectives and core commitments. They outline strategic actions. They introduce that GIS system of California nature that I talked about earlier. And, one of the things that will be successful to actually implementation is if CNRA can get consistent high amounts of funding from the state. We saw the governor's first draft of the budget in January, which was really great, include substantial funding for the implementation of this document as well. Nature-based solutions specifically were mentioned. We just want to make sure that that is continued in the May revise of the budget in May, and in the final, of course, draft in June that we will see as the public, and then continue on. We just can't have 1 year and expect this to happen.
So these are all drafts we're talking about. So like everything, a lot of stuff is still in play, presumably through that legislative process we were talking about last month.
Yes, yes and no. The pathways document that I've been referencing was supposed to be finalized this month, but with the extension of the public comment period until February 15th, we're presuming it probably won't be finalized until later this spring. There are other state plans that I talked about that will inform the 30 by 30 strategy, such as the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy, and that's not finalized yet. That document will guide and accelerate long-term climate action, specifically across lands, which will theoretically impact inland waters, aka rivers. So that's really something we want to be on the lookout for. Additionally, new law, yes, is mentioning 30 by 30, including a new exciting bill that was mentioned or that was introduced this month called SB 1224, Watersheds Wildlife Habitat. It's specific to Orange County and San Diego County by Senator Bates, but it's a really good start to seeing the new law and policy that needs to be created to start implementing the 30 by 30 framework.
So when the 30 by 30 framework is finalized, it basically becomes executive policy, right? It is not law per se, but it's like guidance or policy.
It is confusing, to be fair. So a state executive order is legally binding on agencies to implement it, but Governor Newsom has been famous for issuing executive orders that are just basically like a unilateral executive action that's not backed up by the force of the legislative process. So no, it's not legally binding law because it frankly doesn't really have the details to do that. And so while executive orders carry the weight and force of law in their implementation, they don't have the permanence of duly passed law. They can be easily reversed by another subsequent executive order, one day after another, so to speak, versus a law that goes under multiple revisions and has really the force of law once it's signed by the governor after going through both bodies, the House and the Senate. I know that that's really confusing, but essentially here, we're going to have a framework policy document that is implemented by an agency of the state, but the legal weight it will have is through the bills that it references and the funding and the projects that it actually implements on the ground.
So despite the potentially transient nature of this as a policy, it does serve as like a sort of a precedent of and like a feedback cycle of it helps create bills, which in turn actually like formalize the things that 30 by 30 is calling for. Is that a fair way of putting that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great way.
Cool. Well, sounds great. What is FOR doing about all of this? Obviously, presumably so much of it is happening in the state capitol and in CNRA headquarters and California EPA headquarters. Like, what are we doing?
That's a really good question. So since a lot of this is behind closed doors, we've been trying to engage in their robust public process to where we can. So the CNRA had stakeholder workshops throughout 2021 and FOR staff attended those. Those were organized by regions. We gave public comment then. And additionally, they were accepting written and oral public comments through the draft pathways document that was available through late fall, winter, and as I said, until February 15th. Friends of the River signed on to 2 comment letters that were submitted during that review period. And if you have not had a chance, though, to review the document, we still encourage public and FOR members to frankly still comment. There's still a great website, which we'll have up on the later slide, where you can still fill out an online form. CNRA has done a really good job of emphasizing how important the input is to informing this document, especially making sure that it's equitable. And that's something that really requires robust public review and engagement. And frankly, as we said before, FOR was not completely impressed by this draft pathways document because we felt like it really ignored the importance of freshwater ecosystems. So that's part of the reason why we signed on to a comment letter both by NRDC, or the Natural Resources Defense Council, and Save California Salmon. And we also signed on to a letter by the Sierra Nevada Working Group, which really emphasized the importance of our headwaters and why they were not included, really frankly, in their opinion and in our opinion, in the document. So, both comment letters expressed concern. And we wanted to make sure that that was something we supported putting into the formal public record.
So now that we and other organizations have kind of stated our position and about what we think needs to be done, or are we kind of just like waiting on the Natural Resources Agency for now? What's the next step here?
Yes, actually, unfortunately, we're just kind of waiting on CNRA. We have to wait for the budget process, right, too. So that's not going to be finalized until later this year. And that's really when we're going to see that funding start to be divided up, really, and where it's going to be prioritized. And frankly, some of the actions that we recommended to be included in the final draft of the Pathways document will take possibly years to implement and new policy and law to make happen. So, for example, the first one is that the state should commit to establishing, freshwater protected areas and management plans at the watershed scale. That means that you need local authority and support as well as state support to coordinate and make sure that those protected areas include strong protections for freshwater biodiversity hotspots, ecosystem services such as meadows, riparian areas, and rivers. And that's something that will take years and a lot of money to frankly do.
Right.
And then the second action that we recommended is also, pretty intensive. We recommended that there be a commitment to remove non-functional dams, a moratorium on new dams, and a plan to restore connectivity, frankly, between surface water and groundwater, so riparian areas, floodplains, and wetlands. That's a big ask, but something that's absolutely critical to climate resilience for the state.
Well, as we said, we've got 8 years, so the clock is kind of ticking on their self-imposed deadline. So,
Yes, it is.
Despite those issues that you just laid out and like the could be betters, how are you cautiously optimistic about this? How do you think? How do you feel?
Yeah, I think that that's the best way to describe how I'm feeling right now. I think that I'm cautiously optimistic. Friends of the River looks forward to, frankly, any more additional conservation protections for healthy rivers. But what really that'll take is making sure that the 30 by 30 document is properly implemented, it's enforceable, and it prioritizes freshwater ecosystems. I think that that can be done, and I'm hopeful.
Yeah, and in our notes here, we've got does not undermine existing protections. Like, how could it actually make things worse? Is that possible?
It is, unfortunately, and it's just a good thing. This, as a side note, hence the cautiously optimistic.
Right.
I think that the 30 by 30 initiative wants to help quicken the pace and scale of restoration and conservation. With that, unfortunately, comes the risk of disenfranchising tribes, and not giving back land, undermining bedrock environmental laws, and making sure that the definition of conservation is still a really high bar so that projects like, I don't know, the new Pacheco Dam that floods over a mile of a state park
Yeah.
are not seen as beneficial or climate resilient because they aren't. So really making sure that 30 by 30 is enforced equitably and consistently across all forums is going to be really important here without basically undermining existing protections or existing open landscapes that we've already, frankly, preserved.
Yeah. Well, one advantage of this being a little bit open-ended and long-term is that this is an election year, and so many of our viewers will probably start getting phone calls from campaign volunteers asking for their support in campaigns. All of our state officers are seeking re-election, including the governor, the lieutenant governor, etc. So there's an opportunity for constituents and citizens to maybe have their voice heard there. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. With elections comes, the importance of your voice, absolutely, in this democratic government. I think it's really important to tell candidates and frankly, any of your elected, even current elected government officials, why you love rivers and why they should be protected in law. I think that that's really important, and this is a great opportunity to make sure that your voice is heard, especially this year.
Right. So if anyone wants to learn more about all of this, we've got some resources up here on screen, including the actual 30 by 30 website, as well as some other commentary. What is this? How?
Yeah. Yeah, so I put just a couple resources here for people who are interested in reading more. So it's the formal 30 by 30 website, California's website, which includes the draft pathways document, then a link to submitting public comment if you still would like. I also included a link here to the Sierra Club California's comment letter, which was included in a lot of public documents by Sierra Club, frankly, for great recommendations. They have a 30 by 30 initiative team, which is really great, and they're a great partner of Friends of the River. And then another partner, of course, that we mentioned earlier, Natural Resources Defense Council. Kate Poole has an expert blog, which she's been doing a series of blog posts for the last almost now 2 years on the kind of different areas of the 30 by 30 and why they're important to NRDC's work. And since we signed on to their comment letter, I wanted to mention that too here for further reading for those that are interested.
Nice. And so those are here on the screen. And for those people who may only be listening, we'll make sure to put those in the comment and description sections as well. So that's our presentation for today on this 30 by 30 initiative, folks. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us live. If you have any other questions, we are, of course, available at all of our usual haunts, friendsoftheriver.org. We've got contact information up there, social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, whichever your favorite internet spot is. So thanks, Ashley. Any final comments about this?
Well, thanks, Eric. I think this is a really exciting topic. Stay tuned to learn more from Friends of the River on this. This is certainly just the first introduction to the 30 by 30 concept and how Friends of the River is engaged. Please make sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel for alerts for our monthly videos of Ask Ashley. That way you get notifications and don't miss them. And if you do, make sure to just visit the Ask Ashley website. It's a website page on our website at friendsoftheriver.org. Thank you so much all for tuning in.
Thank you.